A little bit about myself. So I work in the Everglades doing a bunch of different things. One of those things is I work as a park ranger. You guys might have seen that uniform before where you see someone wearing a really big kind of silly hat. Those are park rangers. And so I get to take people out into the Everglades hiking and exploring, getting to see a lot of wildlife. I also, in the summertime, I do work catching pythons. So pythons are an invasive species in the Everglades, meaning that people kept them as pets. They are actually from Southeast Asia all the way around the world. They're not native to this ecosystem. And eventually they get pretty big. So enough people let them out into the ecosystem that there's a lot of pythons in the Everglades. So in the summertime, that's one of my primary jobs. I'm out looking for Burmese pythons, which are pretty amazing animals. On this day last year, I caught my biggest one yet with my friend Anne. That snake is about 16 feet, and they're really, really amazing, really cool animals. They are so neat, but they are not a native species in the Everglades. And that means that when there's a lot of them out in the ecosystem, they're causing a lot of problems for our native species. So I also spend a lot of time just playing in the Everglades. It is where I go on my weekends. It's where I go when I have free time. It's a really fun place to go hiking and snorkeling and bird watching and looking for snakes and just spending time out in nature. I've never been up to Canada. I would love to go, but I was looking up some of the places where you guys were staying so I could kind of see what your local ecosystems look like, and they just looked beautiful. So this is a map of course, the United States, and that red little box down there is the area we are going to be focusing on. And looking even closer at it, Everglades is here in South Florida. And so it's right next to Miami, Florida, which is a place where there's an awful lot of people, but it's a big open wilderness area. And there's a lot going on there. So that is Everglades National Park. And so just a little bit about what national parks are. They are all over the world. All sorts of different countries have national parks. And they are protected places that are important to a country and its visitors. So when we decide to make a place a national park, it's a place that we think is special and important, and we want it to be there for future generations. So we protect it so that we can share it with people that live there, with visitors, and with our kids in the future. And there are national parks that are all about going to learn about history, learning about the history of a place. Some of them are all about nature, kind of like the Everglades. And there's 48 national parks in Canada, and there are 419 in the United States. We got a lot of little like tiny parks where you go to learn about history and some old building. So they're not all huge, huge places, but there's an awful lot of them. And I also included Canada Parks logo. You guys might be familiar with that. I think it's pretty cool that the beaver is your park's logo. In the National Park Service in the United States, we have the buffalo, or the American bison. People commonly know them as the buffalo here, but they're actually the bison. Those are not going to be found in South Florida, but that's kind of just a stand-in for we want to protect those places where all of these animals live. And a little bit about the Everglades. So this is an overview of just one area of the Everglades called the 10,000 Islands. Because if you look really closely at it, even just within this picture, you can probably see dozens of little islands all surrounded by water. And Everglades National Park, became a national park in 1947. And a neat thing about the Everglades is that it was a place that people wanted to build on. But a group of ladies in Miami, Florida realized how unique the Everglades was. And those ladies all got together and they created a Florida Federation of Women Club. And that's what they called it. And they were out there telling people how cool the Everglades was and how special it was. And because of those women, it became a national park. And what makes it special is the biodiversity. There's so many different kinds of life. So that's what biodiversity is. There's lots of different species of plant, lots of different species of animal, lots of different habitats, and they're all a little bit different, but they all fit together to form this really unique ecosystem. It is 1.5 million acres. It's really big. If you remember, it was most of southern Florida. It is home to over 1,000 plants, almost 400 species of birds, 40 mammals, 25 species of snakes, alligators and crocodiles, and more. And many of the animals that live here are endangered and rare. So there's not many of them left. So it's very important that we protect them and their habitats. So each of those animals has special adaptations that help them to survive and thrive in their habitat. Each of them might live in a different way. They might look a little bit different. Each one of those adaptations is going to help them survive. So the Everglades, just a little bit about what it is, because when you think of the Everglades, you might have an idea of just like a swamp. That's kind of what a lot of people think of. They think of a deep, murky, dark swamp with just snakes hanging everywhere and alligators and crocodiles fighting over you as you're trying to hike through there and make it out alive. It's not quite like that. There's a lot of cool animals here. There are alligators and crocodiles, but it's a lot more peaceful than that. And there's a lot of really, really beautiful habitats within. We do have those amazing swamps, but that's not it. Some places in the Everglades are high and dry, like this tree island. And tree islands are places that are surrounded by water, but are always going to stay dry. Some of them are like this hardwood hammock, these just really, really shady kind of rainforest looking areas. Some of them are pine rocklands, more open areas where there's a lot of sun beating down, but they're still high and dry. Some of them are freshwater wetlands. This is looking out into an area where the water is only about 6 inches to a foot deep, very, very shallow, all fresh water. And then there is also salt water out on the coast, as well as mangroves, which is that kind of tree there. That's a red mangrove, trees that grow and exist in salt water and thrive there and create these huge forests that all exist just right in those saltwater ecosystems. And all of these different habitats in the Everglades, the reason a certain habitat exists in a certain place is because of its elevation, how high it sits above the sea level, or not, how low it sits below the sea level. And so here in the Everglades, we don't have a lot of range of elevation. Our lowest points are sea level, are 0 feet above sea level. Our highest point in the park is 12 feet above sea level. That's really not that high, but within that 12 feet, there's a big range of ecosystems that are created. And so a little bit about kind of the flow of water through the Everglades, because that's really what ties it all together. We get our water from Lake Okeechobee. Lake Okeechobee gets its water from the rainfall. So we do have 2 seasons here in South Florida. People think of Florida as not having any seasons. I imagine you guys think of Florida as not having any seasons. We don't get snow. The last time we had snow was 1976. I have never seen snow in Florida. That would be really, really cool. But we have a lot of other things going on that shape our seasons here. So the animals here have to be adapted to extremes. Sometimes they might find a habitat that's completely flooded. If you're an alligator, that's a great place to be. If you're a panther, that might not be where you want to lie down and take a nap. That same area is shown here in the wintertime, completely dry. Now you can imagine that any alligator or any fish or any bird that eats fish that was hanging out there had to move and find some different place to live. And so the animals that live in the Everglades and the plants in the Everglades have to change the way that they're living or move to a different spot. They have to deal with some pretty extreme circumstances. And so I'm going to start with some of the most iconic animals of the Everglades. What we're going to do is we're going to start high and dry up in those pine rocklands and hardwood hammocks. And we're going to look at just a few different animals and we're going to work our way out towards the coast. I had a hard time thinking of what animals I wanted to share because I love all of them. But I tried to choose some different representations from different groups and from different habitats, and that I thought just had really cool and different adaptations. And then if you guys have questions about other ones or you want to hear about other animals after during the questions, I would be happy to talk about any of them. But the Florida panther, kind of one of the most iconic ones. Ooh. They are cousins of the mountain lion or the cougar or the catamount or the puma, whatever you might call them. They are related, but these guys are a subspecies. So they are down here in Florida and they don't roam very far. They don't connect with those other populations. So they are considered kind of their own group down here. And they look just a little bit different. You see how she kind of looks like she's wearing eyeliner and she's got like the little wings on it. Yeah, that is kind of a feature of our Florida panthers. They have those distinct black lines on them. All right, so this is where we're gonna get into you guys voting. I am going to ask you what you think this animal's adaptation is, what you think its superpower is, what does it do really well? And you guys can either vote by writing it in the chat or by showing me. If you think it is that it has the loudest roar in the Everglades, You can either write A or show me a 1. If you think it is able to see in the dark, you can show me 2, or you can write in B. Or if it never needs to rest. The Florida panther never needs to rest. Let's see. And I'll try to find where I can pull up the chat. What do you guys think? 2, yeah. Came right up. They are able to see in the dark. They actually don't have the loudest roar in the Everglades. They don't have the loudest roar at all. They make kind of a screaming sound. That's the way that they communicate. It's kind of an eerie sound to hear, but it's not a big, deep sound like we think of with lions. And it's not true that they never need to rest. If you guys have pet cats at home, the Florida panther's schedule looks very, very similar. Resting almost all day and almost all night, and just getting up once in a while to move around or to hunt or to maybe just stretch and find another spot to take a nap. So Florida panthers live in those high and dry areas typically, like the Pine Rocklands. But because the habitats do flood a lot, they're going to have to move around and deal with some pretty extreme circumstances. So they also live in our wetter areas. This is kind of a swampy area over here on the right. And their superpower, being able to see in the dark, is because of a little reflective layer in their eye. Now, I have heard all sorts of people pronounce this differently. So some people say it's the Tapetum Lucidum. Some people say it's the Tapetum Lucidum. We're gonna go with Tapetum Lucidum today because that's how I'm feeling. So guys, even though I can't hear you, practice saying those weird words. Tapetum Lucidum.
Tapetum Lucidum.
Kind of a weird, it sounds like you're saying like a Harry Potter spell
Yeah,
or
spell.
something. So that is a little reflective layer that they have in their eye. Now, if you have ever shined a flashlight out into the dark because you heard something rustling around in the bushes, and suddenly you saw a bunch of eyes staring back at you, you were seeing that little reflective layer. Just like our pet cats and our pet dogs and raccoons or possums that might be wandering around have that, the Florida panther has that reflective layer as well. And what that does is that it magnifies the light coming in to their eyes, and it lets them see. So they can see with just a little bit of starlight or moonlight. They're able to navigate their environment. They're able to climb trees, they're able to hunt, they're able to run at full speed, just the tiniest bit of light. They can see much better than we do, which is pretty cool because it means that they can hunt down prey at night, or they can just be taking a cat nap up in the trees, which is usually what they're going to be doing. So that's kind of their superpower. That is something that they do really well to survive. And I said that they like to be in those high and dry areas, but they're pretty adaptable critters. So this is a panther walking around in the Everglades in the water. This water is not too deep, so it's having an easy time moving through it. But panthers can swim pretty well. They'll move through some really deep areas of water, and you can see it doesn't seem to be bothered by it at all. Just like us, it's not going to want to live in the water. It's going to want to come out and dry at the end of the day. So they will have to find a nice dry tree to take a nap on. But panthers are pretty adaptable critters. Moving on to the corn snake, which is one I chose because it might be one that you guys are familiar with. They're pretty popular to have as pets, but they're also wild animals here in South Florida. Corn snakes get the name because if you look at their belly scales, their ventral scales, kind of looks like little kernels of corn. So that's where that name comes from, if you've ever heard that and wondered, why is that? Not that they eat corn, it's that their bellies kind of have that appearance. All right. So here is our corn snake again. Think about what its superpower might be. Are they really fast? They're capable of kind of chasing down prey, crawling up trees really quickly. Do they have really good camouflage? Does that bright red color let them blend in? Or do they have venomous fangs that help them overpower their prey? What do you guys think? Which superpower do you think our corn snake has?
All right, we're seeing some B, some A, another A, another B.
It is B. They have amazing camouflage, which when you just see one like that, kind of doesn't seem that believable. But take a look at this corn snake blending in with the leaf litter on the ground, hanging out in an oak tree filled hammock. And they blend in remarkably well. Sometimes when you actually spot them, you think, how did I miss that? But that pattern does a really great job of helping them to blend in with their environment. They will also bend their body up into like a little curl and makes them look a little more like a stick. So that's usually what they're going to do if they feel that there is a predator around. Moving on to our Anhinga. Have you guys ever heard of an Anhinga before? No? They are one of my favorite birds that we have here in the Everglades. So this is an Anhinga, and this is a male Anhinga. Males have the black head and neck. Females have a lighter colored neck, more of a brown. So do we think that they are able to swim like a fish, have amazing camouflage to blend into their environment, or fly for thousands of miles without stopping? What are you guys thinking? Let's see. All right. If you said A, you guys are correct. That's kind of surprising. And a lot of people see them in the water and think that there's something wrong, but they are actually perfectly adapted to moving through the water. And they do that having those webbed feet that lets them swim around just like a duck, but they have something more special than a duck that makes them a really good hunter. And it is that they have that very sharp beak. And so they use that to spear through their prey. So having those fins and having that sharp spear makes them a lot like a spear diver, like a spear fisher who is swimming through the water and hunting for fish. They also have special feathers that let them soak in water and sink deep down into the water. So they're not having to fight really hard to swim down. Have you guys ever gone swimming and you really want to see something that's down on the bottom, but you're kicking so hard because your body just wants you to float back up towards the surface? Yeah, that's how humans are made. We're supposed to float like that. These guys, no. They have those feathers that soak up water. So when they jump into the water, they stealthily swim right down. And it's pretty amazing. It lets them be kind of sneaky. They can easily sneak up on prey. They can use those feet to swim. They can use that tail like a rudder to help them steer. And it makes them pretty fast, but they're not that fast in the air. They're surprisingly fast underwater.
Wow.
You can imagine if you were a fish and you saw that coming at you, that would be kind of terrifying. They also get the name snake bird because they have such a long, skinny neck, and sometimes they'll swim with just the head out of the water, and people think it's a snake looking at them. All right, moving on to our American alligator, who probably is the one that you thought of when you thought of the Everglades. They're kind of the iconic animal. All right, what do we think they have? Do we think that they have built-in solar panels to provide them energy? Do they have a never-ending supply of teeth? No need to worry about cavities. I would love that superpower. Or do they build their own homes? Are they home builders? Rather than adapting to their environment, do they adapt it to them? What do you guys think? Expand it again so I can see. All right, if you said any of those, you guys were correct. They have every one of those superpowers. But let me explain, because that might be just a little bit confusing. So first off, they do build their own habitat. They are very well adapted to live where they do in the Everglades. But remember, we've got two seasons. We've got the wet and the dry. And alligators need to live in water. They feed in water, but more importantly, because they are cold-blooded animals, they use the water to help regulate their body temperature. If it's too hot, they can slide in there and they can cool off. If it's too cold, the water is going to be usually warmer than the air, so they can slide in there to warm up. And so alligators, if they don't have water, if their water hole they're in is dry, they're going to have to walk really, really far maybe to find a place where they can live. And they'll either have to find a water hole that already exists and maybe cohabitate with a bunch of other alligators and kind of have to get along with them, or they might build their own. So throughout the Everglades, there are these little holes, which are called alligator holes, because they use their tail and their back feet to stir up the mud and to excavate it and to pull it out of that hole. And because the water in the Everglades is very, very little between our below our surface, it's not that far down. So that hole is going to fill in with water, and that's where they will spend their dry season. Now, Moving on to those solar panels. Do you guys see the bumps on the back of the alligator? Those bumps are called scutes. And underneath every scute, there is a little bone called an osteoderm. I have that photo of one, but I also have one here if you guys can see me, so you can see how big it is. Osteoderms are pretty cool. They help to protect the alligator because they have a built-in armor on their back at all times. But that's not what's most special about them. All of those little holes on a live alligator are going to be filled with teeny tiny little blood vessels, these tiny little veins. And alligators, when they get cold, they go and they sit in the sun, which was what you saw all of those alligators doing in that photo before. They're going to sit there to warm up. And on the alligator's back, there's just a tiny layer of skin over that osteoderm. So the sun is going to warm up the scute, warm up the blood. The blood's going to move through the alligator's body, and it is going to provide them with the energy that they need and the warmth that they need to go about their day, to go about their business. If an alligator ends up in an area that's too cold, or it's a day that's too cold and they're not able to get enough sun, it's not going to hurt them, but they're not going to have the energy that they need to move around. So during wintertime, often our alligators are kind of lazy, kind of lethargic. They just laying out there on the banks and they just don't have the energy to function. And that's where you'll see them most of the time. So in a way, these are a lot like having a built-in solar panel on their back. That's where they're going to get their energy from. And then their teeth. Alligators do not have to worry about cavities. Alligators can bite down on the hardest things and not have to worry about breaking their teeth, unlike us. So if we were to bite down on a gobstop or one of those big candies, we could break our teeth. And if we break our teeth, that's not a good thing, right? We get two chances in our life. We have our baby teeth and we have our adult teeth. We have to take care of them. If you're an alligator, it doesn't matter. If one falls out, there's another one right underneath it, ready to take its place. So here are two tiny little alligator teeth. Ooh. And you can kind of see that there is a hole. It is hollow. So when the alligator maybe bit down on a food, a turtle, who knows, and it broke off, there was just a tiny little tooth underneath it that was ready to grow into its place. So alligators have many adaptations and superpowers that let them survive in the Everglades. And that's why they've been around for millions of years. So another cool thing that alligators can do, and I like to include this because I mentioned for the Florida panther that they don't have a very loud roar. We are going to see if you guys can hear this. The sound might, apparently I didn't have the option to include computer audio.
Oh.
Yeah, it wouldn't let me do that. I said I had to download something. We're gonna try this. And I'm gonna turn my volume up. Can you guys hear the roar? It's kind of quiet on there. So alligators have the loudest roar of any animal in the Everglades, which is kind of surprising because people think that they are just going to be sitting there, minding their own business, not making a lot of noise. But they are very communicative. They talk, just not like us. If an alligator is not happy because someone is moving into their habitat, they will do this bellow. And if you look very carefully at its back, they also do something that we call the water dance. The sound moving through their body produces vibrations. Oh. And so the water that is above their back dances up off of it. So I'll play it one more time so you guys can see that. That was pretty cool. And that roar is one of the loudest noises that I've ever heard an animal make. The first time I heard it, I was hiking with my dog and I thought, why is someone starting a boat over there in the river? It's a very, very shallow river. And then I rounded the corner and there was a huge alligator over there looking at me and my tiny dog. And so I picked my tiny dog up. And it wasn't that the alligator wanted to eat me. That wasn't it welcoming me over saying, I'm hungry, come over here. That was the alligator knowing that I was coming and not wanting to be bothered. And so they make that loud noise. It is very, very obvious. That is our sign. Okay, I'm gonna give you just a little bit of space. But they will also do that. The big males will do that to attract females because they're saying, I am the biggest, I am the baddest. And they're just trying to show how capable and loud they are. They'll also sometimes do that in response to cars or planes or lawnmowers or just loud noises going by. They hear that and they think, gotta defend my territory. And they'll start making that sound in response, which is pretty cool. Let's see. Go on to the next page. Okay.
Ooh.
Black vulture. You guys are probably familiar with vultures. Vultures, as we know, like to eat dead things, which doesn't make a lot of sense to us, but is a really important thing for the ecosystem. They help keep the ecosystem clean. They provide that amazing service that helps to reduce disease. They're really important. They're cool critters, but to do that, they have some incredible superpowers. So, do they have an amazing sense of smell that lets them seek out and find that prey? Are they the largest birds in the world? They're able to fly really far because they have such a big wingspan. Or do they just offend themselves by being gross? What do you guys think? I see a lot of enthusiasm for the last one.
We've got some A's and some C's.
A's and some C's. It is actually C. They defend themselves by being gross. They don't have a bad sense of smell per se, but they don't have the best sense of smell, which means that they actually like to hang out in groups. They hang out in flocks of other vultures. If you were in a big room and you dropped something on the ground and you needed to find it, it's going to be a lot easier if you invite all of your friends to help you look. So these vultures will fly really, really far distances with these other birds, and hopefully with all of them looking for that prey, one of them is going to find it. They don't have the best sense of smell, but they do defend themselves by being gross. I'll tell you a little bit about some of their defenses and their kind of adaptations that help them eat and survive in the way that they do. The first thing that they have is that bald head. If you are spending your whole day with your head down in a carcass of an animal, you have to have a way to keep yourself clean. If they had feathers all over their head, it would be sticky and gunky and it'd be hard to get it off. So having that bald head means that at the end of the day, they go over to a puddle, they stick their head down in, they splash it around, and anything gross comes off. It actually keeps them very clean. They don't smell that bad. They're kind of nice, cleanly birds despite the way that they live. Except you might disagree with that when you hear number 2. Because they often live in hot places like South Florida, they do something kind of gross to cool themselves off. So black and darker colors tend to absorb more heat than lighter colors. You will notice that this vulture is black. When it is very, very hot out, they want to reduce the amount of their body that is absorbing that heat. So they poop on their legs to help cool their bodies off. So that's number 2. And then the grossest thing that vultures do. When a vulture is threatened, if you come too close to it, the first thing it's going to want to do is fly away. But if that's not going to work, if you're a predator and you're bearing down on it and it can't fly away, they will turn at you and they will projectile vomit on you. And now we remember what they are eating. All of that is going to be spilling out onto you.
Ooh.
It is a terrible, terrible thing. Now you can imagine there is no predator in the Everglades that is going to keep trying to pursue them after that happens. After that happens, they are safe to go on their merry way. So vultures, they kind of just look like this little innocuous bird over there. They're just minding their own business. They're harmless. They really are harmless, but they've got a lot going on. They have some pretty cool things that they're doing to survive. So moving on to our American crocodile, and just a little bit about them, because I think it's neat that this is the only place in the world where we have both alligators and crocodiles. Usually they're living in separate habitats, but sometimes you'll see them actually sitting side by side. And they look a lot like an alligator if you're not familiar with them. You're just seeing a big lizard sitting out there on the bank. But they have some differences. So this is the American crocodile. They tend to have some features that set them apart from the alligator. So we saw our alligator earlier. They are not that closely related, believe it or not. Crocodiles tend to have lighter color skin. They have a V-shaped snout. Notice that their snout is a lot more narrow. And they tend to live in salt water or brackish water. Brackish water is that mixture of salt and fresh. not as salty as the ocean, but it is still salt water. Alligators can't live there for too long. They can't deal with that salt water, but crocodiles thrive in it. All right, what do we think? Are they capable of hunting prey anywhere, in water or on land? Do they have super sensing skin? Or do they have a warm blood that they use it to regulate their body temperature? What do you guys think?
Let's see, we've got AACA.
Okay, I stumped everybody on this one. It is B. They have super sensing skin.
Madeline got that one. Good job, Madeline.
If you look closely at this snout of this alligator or this crocodile, and I just took this photo just a few weeks ago down in the Everglades. It has its mouth open. It's actually trying to cool itself off. It's letting out heat. It's panting like a dog does. You will see that there are all of these tiny little dots on a crocodile's face. If we zoom in on those dots, you'll notice they're everywhere. So those are a big word. Integumentary sensory organs. That's kind of crazy. But what that means is that they have a very sensitive face. We use our hands to navigate our environment. If you're walking through the house and the lights are off, you're putting your hands out in front of you, trying to figure out where you are, trying to feel. Crocodiles are often living in some very murky water. They can hunt in the daytime, they can hunt at night. They can't see very well when they dip underwater because it's so murky. So having all of those tiny little, very, very sensitive spots on their face means that if a fish is in the water anywhere near them, they can feel it and they are able to find where it is and locate their prey. So you can see the water that this crocodile is in. This isn't the same area where I took that last photo. It's very, very dark colored. There are tannins that dye that water that color from the mangroves where they live. So that lets them see underwater, not with their eyes, but with their skin. And that is going to be a really, really helpful thing when it comes to finding prey. It is going to make it an awful lot easier than if they were hunting underwater and just bumping into who knows what down there. So this is also in the same area. It's a spot called Flamingo, where there's an awful lot of crocodiles that all hang out. And then, I think last but not least for the animals, my very, very favorite animal in the Everglades, my favorite animal in the world, the Smalltooth Sawfish. Have you guys ever seen anything like that? They're weird, they are wacky, they are wild, they are so neat. So that thing on that fish's face is called a rostrum. It's a fancy word referring to that saw. All right, so what do we think they're gonna use that saw for? Is it a weapon for fighting other sawfish? Is it used to cut down mangroves that get in their way as they're navigating their environment? Or is it used to sense and capture small prey? What do you guys think?
Let's see. Abby says he looks like a chainsaw, which is totally fair.
Totally true.
All
They
right,
got a built-in chainsaw to their face.
We have a lot of C's as answers, couple of B's.
Yeah, it is C. Believe it or not. It's not a weapon for fighting other sawfish. It is not used to cut down mangroves to get in their way. I could probably do it without, who knows. And it is used to sense and capture small prey. I included the word small in there because we kind of tend to think, we see an animal like that, think that must be eating some big, pretty big fish, maybe even sharks, things like that. But they tend to eat small prey. They use that saw to just nose around and sense for fish. It's very, very sensitive also. So they can sense the electrical pulses put out by fish around them. So you can see when it's swimming, it's leading with that saw, moving it back and forth. I like to think of it kind of like a metal detector.
Yeah, and Dylan, can I just add something here?
Yes, please.
So Abby and Lily Beth, who were at our junior marine biologist program last year, if you remember when we were out fishing for eels, we had a few objects we were passing around as kind of a show and tell. And one of them was a sawfish rostrum. Do you guys remember seeing that piece of rostrum and it had all the teeth coming out of it? I'm not sure if everyone got to see it, but the reason that we had one in the local university's museum is because, as you guys can imagine, this is a really weird looking animal. And when humans see weird looking animals, we like to collect them, which is really a bad thing for us to do. So that's why one of the reasons why sawfish populations are so endangered is because we like to kill a lot of them. But yeah, I just wanted to remind Abby and Lily Beth that maybe they had seen that at our program last year.
Yes, they're pretty memorable critters once you learn about them. Very, very fascinating. And so it's going to kind of be like a metal detector, but then it is also their weapon that they use to capture their prey. It's going to be that tool. But we might think, oh, they are out there eating big things with that saw. They can capture anything that they want. They're going to have big jaws like a shark. But in reality, do you guys want to see what their mouth looks like? That. They have a mouth just like a stingray. It's just these little grinding plates. So anything that they're going to eat has to pass through there. They're not going to be taking big chunks off of prey. They're going to have to eat it whole. So these guys love ladyfish, things that are tiny, mullet, nothing that big. And they are my favorite animal out in the Everglades, and anywhere really for that matter. And so these are just some of the few animals that are in the Everglades. Remember I said there's thousands of animals. If we're including those insects, there's many, many thousands. There's a lot going on there. And it's such a big place that it takes a lot of people to make it work. I see just a few hands up, so I'm just going to show you some of the types of people that live, that work in the park really briefly, and then I can't wait to hear your questions. So there are people that work out with the public that are taking people out on hikes. This is Ranger Andrea, and she is in a sluice log, what we call it, where you basically go out hiking in the water. Sometimes the water's up to your waist, sometimes the water's up to your chest, sometimes the water's just ankle deep, depending on the time of year. So you can visit the Everglades and go on hikes with rangers. Rangers also work inside of those visitor centers. So you can go and you can say, I want to see this habitat, I want to see this animal, and the rangers can kind of give you an idea of where to go. So some people like that job because it's just a fun way to meet people from all around the world. There are also firefighters that work in the Everglades. And I didn't talk much about this, but those firefighters will put out fires as well as set fires. This is an ecosystem that actually needs fire to stay healthy. Lightning used to start fires throughout the Everglades. It doesn't as often nowadays, so sometimes we will set those fires. So this is a ranger named Anna who is out there setting a fire in the campground, because that way in the future, if there is a wildfire there, it won't be big and dangerous for visitors. There are also law enforcement rangers that are moving around in the park, making sure that people are staying safe, making sure that people are staying safe around the animals and are respecting the animals. This is Ranger Tony. He has worked in the park for 30 years and he patrols the park by boat. A lot of people get lost when they're boating out in the Everglades. So that's a big part of his job, is making sure that people are staying safe, know where they are, and helping orient them to the wilderness. There are also a lot of scientists. You can imagine with all of these different animals, with all of these different ecosystems, it takes a lot of scientists to understand. So some of these scientists are out studying our animals like sea turtles. So these two researchers are studying the sea turtle nest out on the coast in a place called Cape Sable, that is one of the most remote places in the United States, meaning far away from any cities, far away from any people. This is Ranger Anna, who is studying crocodiles and alligators. When she goes up in the helicopter, it takes her out into the wilderness and it drops her down, and she goes out and actually looks at these nests of these alligators, and will count how many eggs are inside of there and see how they are doing, which is a really, really exciting job. And then this is Ranger Michiko, who is studying our crocodiles. These are tiny baby American crocodiles out on the coast, and they are an endangered species. Well, they're not a threatened species. They're doing a lot better because we've been protecting them and studying them. And so this study has been going on for 40 years. Her boss has been studying them since he was about 20. He's still there studying them, learning so much about them. And so these researchers study all of the animals out in the Everglades, all of these different places. There is so much that we've learned and so much that we still have to learn. So it's a really fun place to be. It's a really fun place to work. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. And I am so sorry if you guys had your hands up. I could see, I was alternating between screens. I couldn't see everybody at once. So it's kind of shifting so I could see everybody every few minutes. I'm so sorry if you had your hands up and I did not see it. But if you have questions, I would love to hear them.
And did the Tapetum Lucidum, is it the same thing in house cats' eyes as well as the Florida panthers?
It is. It's a similar structure. Depending on the animal, the species, it might vary just a little bit, but it's doing the exact same thing. And kind of a neat thing about it too, is that the color is different for different animals. So alligators and crocodiles, theirs is a reddish color. For most house cats, there's a kind of a green color. For panthers and bears, it's also a green color. But the Cheshire cat, their eyes are, Cheshire cat, that's the one, maybe. Their eyes are kind of a bluish one. What, Siamese cat, that's the one. Their eyes reflect turquoise. Ooh. Turquoise blue, which is different than other cats. So different by species, and then sometimes different with these different animals as well.
Can you explain biodiversity again?
That's one of my favorite ideas, so I'm happy to explain that. Biodiversity means there's a bunch of different species. So a biodiverse ecosystem has a lot of different animals and a lot of different plants. And that's really important because it means that the ecosystem is healthier and more complex. There's more going on. There's animals that fill in every different role. We call those an animal's job, I kind of like to call it. We refer to it as their niche. It's the way that they live. It's the way that they interact with their ecosystem. It's who they eat. It's who they're eaten by. And having more of those players, having more of those species and those ecosystems makes the ecosystems a lot healthier. So when we see a very biodiverse ecosystem, it means it's really healthy and it's really resilient, which means that if something like a storm happens or maybe a really big fire happens, the ecosystem is healthier and stronger and it's able to bounce back really well.
You set the fires so the other fire, so when real fires happen, it's not as dangerous. Mm-hmm. Do you check for animals or species before you set it on fire?
Yeah, that's an awesome question.
That's a good question.
So for the most part, the animals that live out in the Everglades are adapted to dealing with fire. So just like I talked about how they have to be adapted to dealing with the different seasons, to drought, to flood, fire is just one other thing. And so most of those animals have some way that they keep themselves safe. Some of them, like the alligators, they just go and they sit under the water. They have lungs just like we do, but if they're not moving, they can rest under the water for hours. And so an alligator would probably just hang out under the water and they'd stay completely safe. Same for all of the fish and the turtles. Animals like birds are usually going to do a good job of flying away far in advance of it. And so we don't specifically walk around and make sure that there's no animals there. But what they do is we make sure that the fire doesn't move too quickly. And so they do that by setting small fires that are going to then be moved slowly by the wind. And that way, there probably are animals there, but they have plenty of time to pick up and move and to get away from it. And at the end of the day, having that ecosystem burnt actually makes it like a better home for them. Kind of like if you stopped doing your laundry and you stopped ever picking up after yourselves and your bedroom just got full of all sorts of stuff and you couldn't even see the floor anymore. That's kind of what it's like before we have a wildfire. There's so much brush and so much debris that it's hard for some of these animals to move around through the ecosystems. So a fire, I sometimes equate it to like the ecosystem getting a haircut, just cleaning things up, giving it a nice trim, keeping it nice and pretty. But it's also kind of just like a big, big clean. Like your parents just got so sick of it and they told you, you need to go pick up everything right now. And suddenly things are looking better. You can walk around, there's space, there's a room to breathe. So at the end of the day, those fires are also actually a good thing for those animals, even if in the moment, like they have to deal with a fire, which is not like a fun thing for them.
Are the animals afraid of humans, or are they okay with humans?
I love that you asked that. That's a great question. So all of the animals in the Everglades are wild. So we do not except for you saw the researchers holding them in some cases, that's the only time that we ever interact with them, we ever touch them. They are not fed by us. And so what that means is that when we are out there, most animals tend to see us as a predator, or at least something to be concerned about. And so a lot of times the animals will run away from you. There are some exceptions. There's a place called the Anhinga Trail, where there's a lot of anhingas and there's a lot of alligators. And the animals that live there are kind of used to seeing people moving back and forth. So they're a little bit less afraid, but they've never been fed. So they will never come over towards us. So I kind of think of it as almost like they have a truce. There's a little fence that runs along the water by their habitat. And I have seen, once somebody dropped a bottle over the edge of there, and we stepped over to pick up that bottle. And it was funny because sometimes you'll have alligators very close to the railing. And as long as you're on your side of the railing, they don't mind it. But when one of the rangers stepped over to grab a bottle, all of the animals seemed shocked. It was like we'd suddenly stepped over into their habitat. We're doing something they didn't expect, and they ran. They got very far away from us. So they are, I would say, kind of not bothered by us, but also not super excited that we're out there moving through their home.
Yeah.
If like they have a medical issue, do you like check them up when they're a baby or anything?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most of the animals in the park, they know what to do to take care of themselves better than we could. And so we do not do anything for them. They're out there, they're surviving, they're thriving on their own. For some of the animals, like some of the animals that are very, very endangered, and there's very few of them, we want to make sure that all of them survive, so they have the best possible chance to keep living and to grow their population. So when panthers have been injured, they have been rehabilitated and then released. And the attitude that we take is that if it's something that happened in nature between animals, we won't intervene. So if it's two crocodiles and they're fighting and one of them has something happen to them, we're not going to go in and we're not going to do anything, because that's nature. They know crocodiles are so resilient. They know exactly what they need to do to survive. But if there's an animal that was hurt because of a person, like if someone left fishing line out and it's tangled around it, or if an animal was hit by a car, we will capture them and we will rehabilitate them with the goal of releasing them back into the ecosystem. So kind of a little bit of everything, but for the most part, they are so good at surviving on their own. It's amazing how well they do it. They don't need us at all.
Have you ever been bitten by like a python, Dylan?
So I have been bitten by a python, but it's not something I am proud of, because I would say that for the most part, for people that work with those animals, you know what to do to capture them, you know what to do to stay safe, and you never want to be bitten by them. You never want to do that. So I have been bitten by a python, and they are not venomous. And they also, believe it or not, they have a lot of teeth, but they're pretty skinny teeth. So it wasn't a good feeling, but it's not that bad. It wasn't like I needed to go to the doctors or anything.
Do you ever get scared when you're like catching pythons?
Yeah, well, I try to be very, very cautious. So whenever I am out in the Everglades, I always let people know where I am and where I'm going to be, so that they know to keep an eye out for me. They know if I don't come back, where to go look for me. And so I try to do everything possible to stay safe. And when I am capturing pythons, I have had one time where there was a python that was big enough and I was on my own, and I said, I'm not going to do this. This is not a good idea. And so I try not to put myself in a situation where I would have to be really worried. The big snake that I caught with my friend Anne, that was certainly the most I've had to work to catch a python, but I never felt endangered. I just felt very, very tired.
Yeah. And also, I think any time that you are a biologist or a naturalist working with wild animals, you always have to make sure that you have the proper training before you go to do this. So, Dylan and I actually have done some shark research together where you kind of have to jump on and restrain a shark. That's not something that you just kind of jump into. That's something that you take courses and you kind of learn slowly from your mentors.
What do you do with the pythons that you catch?
So the pythons that we catch, we turn them over to the biologist. And so some of them are euthanized, but some of them are also used in what we call Judas snake studies. This is one of the coolest things. There's so much really cool snake research happening right now, where we will put a tracker on them and we release them out into the environment, which kind of you think like, but you just caught it. Why are you releasing it? But we can then follow them. And there's certain times a year where they tend to be social and they tend to go where other pythons are. So if we release one out into the ecosystem, every few days we'll go and we will look for it. We'll use these big like antennae and we're out there, we're listening for them, finding them, tracking them wherever they may go. Sometimes it's in deep water, sometimes it's in the trees that you're climbing through to find them. And once we find them, sometimes we'll find more. It's pretty neat. The most success I've heard with that technique is that some researchers caught 7 other snakes that were all hanging out near the one snake that they'd released. So there is still a lot that we don't know about pythons, believe it or not. You might think like, well, there's 16-foot snakes slithering around. How can you miss them? They're everywhere. But they blend in so well. And they don't eat people. So when we're hiking out there, it's not that they're trying to come after us. They don't want to be seen. They sit really, really still and blend in so well. So we have to use all sorts of different techniques to kind of see what's going to be the best way to find ones in the future, what's going to be the best way to make sure that they're not spreading into other ecosystems. So yeah, that's one thing that we'll do with them.
And birds stay underwater for?
So they are usually moving around very actively when they're under the water. So they usually aren't holding their breath for more than about 5 minutes. And it's usually even less than that. I usually see them go under and maybe every 30 seconds they'll pop up and get a breath. But like if you've ever sat in a pool and tried to hold your breath as hard as you could, as long as you could, if you're sitting completely still, sometimes you can hold it for a while. If you're swimming around and you're using up a lot of energy, I usually can't hold my breath for very long at all during that case. So because anhingas are always hunting and moving when they're down there, it's not nearly as long as some of the animals like alligators that are going underwater to take a nap.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So I know we have so many questions because Dylann just gave us like the most perfect kind of introductory presentation into all of the amazing things in the Everglades. And so while we learned about fantastic adaptations from a bunch of different animals, what we also need to think about with the Everglades is that it's a very endangered environment. So Dylann talked about how important biodiversity is. Well, there's a lot of species in the Everglades that are critically endangered, like the panthers that need our help. And so this takes us all kind of back full circle to the idea that it's really our responsibility as humans, because we caused almost all of these problems, to actually do our part to help protect the environment.